Do you give your consent to have this interview uploaded to YouTube for the purposes of this class assignment?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, what grades and subjects have you taught?
I have taught 8th grade math, 4th grade math, and a K4 STEM course.
How long have you been teaching?
3.5 years.
What are the school systems that you've taught in?
I have taught in Putnam County and Knox County.
How would you describe the school system in which you teach now, or the most recent place that you've taught?
The school system that I teach in now has a high poverty level, specifically in the school where I taught, was 98% free and reduced lunch, around that number. We had a high ESL population and a lower a lower achievement level than most of the other schools.
What do you mean by the lower achievement level?
As far as TCAP
Okay.
scores.
Okay. So, how did your teacher preparation program train you for working in a rural school?
I don't feel like in the teacher preparation program it was very specific on this is how you teach in a rural area versus any other. However, it may have been more toward a rural school just because where I went to school was in a more rural area.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
What would you change about your teacher education program if you could?
Probably what I would change is field experience early on in the program, maybe before your junior and senior year, to get a feel for if you really want to do teaching. And then also the junior and senior classes where it's more hands-on and you're learning how to teach by actually teaching. I feel like that would be helpful in the freshman, sophomore courses where applicable.
If you had to give one piece of advice to an upcoming rural teacher, what would you tell them?
Not to expect all of the children to come from a good home, and to teach the whole child, not just what they need to learn from books, but you might need to be the mother or the father or someone that gives them emotional support on top of educational.
So, what do you mean by not coming from good homes?
Students that may not live with their mom or dad. They may be growing up in a home where they live with grandparents, or students that live in a home where parents aren't at home very often because they're working. They leave on a bus when their parents have already left for work, and then they come home on a bus and their parents aren't home yet. So they have a lot of time by themselves, and there's not a lot of parental support because they just can't be there for monetary reasons.
So, tell me what comes to mind when you hear the word rural.
When I hear the word rural, I think of a sparsely populated area. I do think of a higher poverty level from hearing the word, and yeah, that's pretty much what I think.
Okay. What do you wish people knew about rural learners or students?
That they have the same ability level as everyone else. They just have different struggles, I guess, and challenges from a home base, such as maybe no internet access, or like I said, they don't have that parental support at home to help them with homework.
Okay. What do you wish people knew about rural families?
I guess the same thing, that the families you know, a lot of times in rural areas they're farmers maybe. I know we have a lot of workers that work in factories and things like that. So keeping in mind the hours that they can meet with you, the hours that the kids are actually home with their families, is important.
So tell me what an average day in your classroom is like.
Well, the most previous class that I taught was a STEM education class, and it was a 30-minute course that all the students took for Encore. And so my classroom would be, they come in, they work on a project, and it was all hands-on, and there wasn't a lot of sitting and lecturing. They were mainly, well, I didn't have desks in my room, we had tables, and so they were moving around, they were working as a group, and they were solving a problem.
So can you describe to me the best experience that you've had as a teacher in your career?
Okay. The best experience that I've had as a teacher in my career is when I had a student that came into my math classroom and absolutely hated math. She told me from the very beginning that it was her least favorite subject, she wasn't good at it, and she never understood anything that was going on. And by the time she left my classroom, she thanked me for being there for her when she needed me, and she felt like she was really good at math now, and she felt comfortable going into an honors math course the next year in high school. And she just said her overall experience, or her overall feelings, I guess, towards math had completely changed.
So kind of on the other side of the coin, what's the worst experience that you've had as a teacher?
The worst experience I've had as a teacher was I walked into my first position teaching. I walked into the classroom halfway through the year because the previous teacher had quit due to the student behavior. And so walking into that classroom having zero actual teaching experience and having no classroom management skills, and a group of students that had already caused one teacher to quit, was terrifying. And the worst beginning, I suppose, to a teaching position that later turned into one of the best experiences, but it began pretty bad.
So what are some of the challenges that you feel are associated with working in a rural school?
Challenges would be budget. In my experience, we didn't have the highest budget available to us, so classroom funds, the $15 fee that the students paid at the beginning of the year, most of them had opted out of that fee, so we didn't have any classroom money there. Anything that was given to us was through churches or other donors, and so we did not have a lot of money coming in to start our classroom up, so it was a lot of out of pocket. So in my experience, that's some of the challenges. The other challenges would include what I said previously about, parent-teacher interaction, the availability of parents during school time.
Okay. What are some of the benefits you feel like are associated with working in a rural school?
In my experience, the benefits have included having a smaller school in general, so you know all of the students, you know whose siblings belong to which other person, and you get to know the families pretty well. And then just having a close working relationship with your coworkers. Those would be the benefits that I've seen.
You mentioned the school size was smaller. What about class size? Was that pretty much the same no matter where you went teaching?
I don't feel like that's at least for me, changed. The class size was actually a little bit large, teaching in a rural school. So I don't know, in all systems, but in my particular school, we had, I guess, average to a higher class size because of budget challenges.
So how is working in the rural school systems that you've worked at different from working in more urban areas?
When I worked in a more urban area, I didn't have to worry about supplies. It was all given to me, and it was unlimited. For example, like copy paper. In the rural area, I had to purchase my own copy paper out of my classroom funds, and if I didn't have enough money, it came out of my pocket. In the urban school that I worked in, they just had stacks of paper that you could go and take, and you didn't have print copy limits and things like that. And that sounds like something small and not a big deal, but it's supplies for your classroom, and it adds up, and it becomes a strain on the teacher, having to purchase your own supplies. So that was the biggest thing that I noticed working in an urban school. And also, the urban school that I worked in was very large. For 3 grade levels, we had 900 students. And so I did not know many of the students. I didn't know their background. I didn't know, where they lived. I didn't know half of the employees that I worked with. So those are the main differences, I suppose.
Okay. So throughout your teaching career, what would you say are the characteristics of a successful student?
I feel like that's hard to point and say this student is successful just by looking at them, but a successful student is one who has inner drive. From what I've seen, it's a student who takes pride in what they do and wants to be where they are, and looks to you for guidance on how to be successful as a teacher.
What do you feel like the purpose of school is for students? Like once they graduate high school, what's the purpose? What should they be able to do? Why are we forcing them through 12 grades of education?
I feel like the purpose of education is so that they can leave school and do something with themselves. They can be a better person in the community. They can go on and do whatever it is they want to do, whether it be college or some sort of job that they want to do, or I would hope that everything that they learn in K-12 is applicable in their future, no matter what it is that they want to do.
Okay. So, based on your experiences in rural schools, how does your administration help making decisions or providing support? How do you interact with them?
In the most previous position, I had 2 separate sets of principals come through, and it was different with each. I feel like the most previous set of principals let you make a lot of decisions in your own classroom. In my STEM position, in my STEM course, I had full reins. I had 0 guidance as to what they wanted it to look like, and so that was almost a blessing and a curse, because I wasn't sure what the outcome was going to be, or if it was along the lines of what they wanted, because I didn't have specific guidelines. They did provide support when I asked for it, but I do feel like the day-to-day decisions, a majority of the time, was up to the teacher, unless you ask for help.
What are some of the resources that you have found or developed that have helped you work and be successful in a rural environment?
Some of the resources, definitely the donors that we had for our school, for monetary reasons, and then also they would come in and do fun events for our students. Offer like popsicle parties for students that achieved a certain reading goal, things like that. And so that didn't land on the teachers' shoulders for buying everything. Another thing that has helped me in a rural environment is we have an interpreter in our school, and I feel like we have a very high ESL population, and if we had not had the resource of an interpreter, it would have been a lot more of a struggle to talk with the parents.
So, in what ways does teaching at a rural school impact the instructional strategies that you use? So, how have you taught differently in a rural environment?
Well, in my specific rural environment, like I said, we had a large ESL population, so that changed the way I taught probably more than anything else. And that just looked like I gave visuals. I wrote down a lot on the board so that they could actually see the words. I would give specific examples so that they didn't struggle with definitions of what I was referring to. I think it's made me a better, for lack of a better term, explainer of things while teaching.
Okay, and then how has teaching at a rural school impacted the instructional materials that you use? I know you mentioned earlier about having to buy a lot of things yourself.
Mm-hmm. I definitely used more hands-on things, which included having to buy those materials. But, you know, if we were using dice in the classroom, I would give the students dice. I didn't just talk about them. Or, you know, maybe they needed flashcards, or in our school we had Chromebooks, and so that was an instructional tool, I guess, that we used in the classroom. But yeah, a lot of hands-on materials.
Okay. So at the school that you taught at, how were services provided to your ESL, ELL students, SPED, or minority students?
With our ESL, ELL students, we had an interpreter, like I said, full-time interpreter. We have 3, and I think they're trying to get a 4th ESL teacher. And so the students, based on how they scored on the WIDA, which is a test on how they do with the English language, depending on how they scored on that, they were pulled out for 30 minutes to 1 hour per day to work on English. And SPED, we were inclusive, I would say 85% of the time. Those students were also pulled out for extra help, maybe 30 minutes to an hour and a half per day. And then minority students, our minority students were mainly ESL. So any other minority would be in the general population.
Okay. So what are some of the obstacles you've encountered with the aforementioned students?
With those students, misunderstanding things that you say, abstract concepts in math was a struggle. Trying to think of a specific example that I've had an issue with. Anything that you can't do hands-on, I would try and find another way for it to be explained to the students. because they might not have understood. So, like when I would tell them to compare fractions, they didn't exactly understand that I meant to compare if they're greater than or less than. They would think like something completely different. And I had a specific example that I remember it happening, but I don't remember what it was now. But just abstract ideas like dreaming, if that were to come up in a lesson, dreaming is a really hard thing to explain to a student, an ESL student. So it was just little things that you did not expect to happen until it happened, and then you would go out and find help with that.
So how does your school establish teacher, parent, administrator, parent, or or just relationships with parents in general?
Our school has gone a long way to promote school-parent relationships. We have a lot of after-school events that include parents. I know around testing time we have meetings where the parents can come in and learn about what their child is being tested over. We have events where the children are rewarded if their parents come with getting like free homework passes and things like that to encourage their parents to come. And it's a workshop where they go through main focus areas in math, usually for 3rd and 4th grade, and the parents go through the workshop to learn. For example, in 4th grade we focused a lot on fractions, because with we don't call it Common Core, but with that type of learning, the teachers often, or the parents often, struggled with how to help their students with homework. And so we would have that workshop to show the parents exactly why we were teaching it the way we were teaching, and to encourage them to help with the homework rather than just send it back saying, I don't know how to do this. So we would have those meetings, and then they often sent out, they were on the Remind phone call thing, and so they would get Remind phone calls. We had a website, we have a website, but that, I don't feel like that was as useful because a lot of our students didn't have internet access at home. So we tried to send home a lot of notes and things like that.
Okay. Describe to me some of your best and worst parent interactions.
I feel like that could be a long list.
Just give me the best and worst.
Okay, so the best parent interaction is probably the parents would come in during the student-teacher conference, the parent-teacher conference, and they were actually interested in how their students were doing, how their kids were doing, and were very involved in what they were learning about, areas of struggle. They knew exactly what grades their students had, why they had those grades, and they were in constant communication with us, and that, I felt, made it a very good relationship and in a positive way. My worst parent interaction was in the more urban area. I had a student, actually it was a set of students, they were twins, in one class with me together, and they were often late to class every day, and so they didn't have a lot of the work that we had completed in class. They did not have grades, they had zeros. And so the parent came in after talking with their students, and the students saying that the reason their grades were zeros was because the teacher hated them. And so the parent came in very angry with me, thinking that I had told the students that I hated them and that's the reason they were failing my class. And it was about an hour and a half of a conference where they screamed at me, and my principal just sat there and let it happen. And then they brought in the students, who later admitted that they had lied, but they watched as I was yelled at and brought down, and so that was definitely the worst interaction I've ever had with parents.
How is parent involvement different in rural areas as compared with urban, on the topic of discipline?
Well, the previous example is probably a great example of that.
Wow.
In the rural area, I noticed that if I said, I'm going to call your parents and find out if what you have said is true, or find out why you haven't been doing your homework, or let them know that we're having this issue in class, immediately it was, I'm so sorry, I was wrong, don't call my parents. In the urban area, when I would say that, they didn't really care, and when I would actually call the parents with the student there, the parent either would not answer, or they would ask me what I did wrong. So, and there was also a grade level difference, so I'm not sure if it was just the urban-rural difference, but I definitely had a better ability to communicate with my rural students' parents than with the urban.
Okay. So in your rural area, can you tell me how parents were involved during assessments, end of the year, standardized testing, things like that? Were they involved? Like, did they understand what was going on? Like, what was the parental involvement like during those times?
We would send home notes and letters describing why we were doing the testing and what the students were expected to know, and what the results would look like. And like I said previously, we had the meetings where the students or the parents would come in and help with those critical areas in math that the parents might have needed help in. But I don't feel like they understood, and it's possible that it was a language barrier, but I don't feel they understood to the extent of what we were doing and why. And I feel that's not just my school. I feel like across the county that's probably true. They don't exactly know what we do, and they don't exactly know why we do it as far as testing goes.
What kind of parent support is common among rural families concerning standardized testing? Do they, what have you observed?
As far as parent support, they did get their students to school on time, which is the main thing that we asked of them. Send your student to school well rested, having breakfast, or send them in time to get free breakfast at our school, and then just have them to school on time. And that's all we asked of them, and that's what we got. So that's really all I've seen.
Okay. As a rural educator, how important was parental involvement when discussing your achievement growth from year to year and tier groups, things like that?
I feel like it's a fine line between labeling their student, their child, and letting them know how to help them move up. And I think putting labels on it, such as tier groups, might not be the best way to go about it, because if you tell them that their child is in the very bottom group, it's not very positive, and then they start to become concerned about what we're doing, and is there something wrong with my child? And that's not necessarily the direction that the conversation needs to go in. It really needs to be a focus on every student can do better. This is what we're trying to do to help the student do better, and it doesn't matter if they're in the very bottom or the very top. we want everyone to grow. So I think a more general idea is probably best in talking about their students with the parents.
Okay.
However, they did get notes sent home to tell them, if they were in an RTI tier.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that the rural school sizes were smaller than the urban ones. How does school size affect the school climate? What were the differences, you would say?
I feel like with a smaller school size, you definitely feel more of a family. It's very inviting. There aren't competitions on better teachers than others because you only have the option of one teacher. In the school that I taught in, it was a very good climate in the rural area. And it was the type of climate where the student, I felt, knew that they could go to any one of their teachers and would have received the same level of caring as any other teacher in that school.
Okay. So how do you think the teacher-student ratio affects the school climate? So when you have a lot more students than teachers, or vice versa?
Yeah, I feel like the smaller amount of students in a group is better. To be able to get the one-on-one with the students. And I do feel like if you have a humongous group, you may not learn all their names, or they may not seem as important to you because you can't specifically point out, how they're doing or what they did, or they may not feel as acknowledged in a larger group size. So I think a smaller ratio is better for the climate.
Okay. So last question. What are the top 3 things that you would change about your job right now?
Top 3 things that I would change about the job would be having a smaller class size, having more funds available for the classroom, and perhaps more parental involvement in the classroom, such as parent volunteers and things like that.
Okay. All right. Well, that's it.